The leadership contest in the UK is shaping up between two contestants. One, Boris Johnson, who's way in the lead, and one, Jeremy Hunt. Now, between the two, I've made the point that Boris Johnson, the key Brexiteer, takes up a room while Jeremy Hunt has political charisma of a wet sponge, and that is somewhat of an insult to the wet sponge. Between the two, one takes up the room, one has a certain degree of gravitas. And yes, womanizer, yes, serial liar, but nevertheless, between the two, Boris Johnson is the one that is most likely has what it takes to push through a Brexit, or at the very least, that's my contention. It's not so much that I like Boris Johnson. It's one of those things kind of like Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill as the totality of a person, but he was the guy to get them out of World War II. I think the same thing about Boris. This is Boris's race to lose. Boris Johnson was so far ahead that in one of the debates, he was caught checking his watch. He had better places to be, apparently. But that gives you this note of how far he is ahead. I was playing my wife's dad in chess this weekend. And the first game was a draw, but that was before I knew he knew how to play it. Then after that, I crushed him brutally. And then the next game, it was even worse. During that second game, he started to pull a Boris and started to check his watch. In his case, he was angry that he was losing. He had nothing else. He couldn't beat me in the game itself, so the only thing he could do as a human being was bitch in the shadows with this kind of subtweet. In Boris Johnson's case, it's just, I am bored. I have better things that I need to be doing with my time, and I am so far ahead that there's no point to this. Boris Johnson has even stopped taking some debates. It is his race to lose, and he is potentially going to lose it. Boris Johnson, this weekend, had the cops called to his house. The cops were called to his house because there was a fight between him and his girlfriend to such a degree where they were screaming and they were arguing that the neighbors called the cops. They got concerned. I'm going to read to you what the neighbor said. At one point, hearing his girlfriend saying, "Get off of me." Carrie Simmons. Boris Johnson has questions to answer if he wants to be prime minister. And Boris Johnson at this point has gone mum. Boris Johnson, if he wants to be prime minister, has questions to answer. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox, and yes, we have hopped across the pond. It was a longer intro than normal, but it is what it is. Guys, I want to thank all of you for your support for the channel. If you guys enjoy this content and you find yourself coming back here often, please consider supporting through PayPal or Patreon. Even $1 helps. It's funny. Shout out to Mrs. Thomas yesterday. She held the soapbox down with a story on Sudan. She wanted to do it. She asked me about it. And I can only do so many stories. So her help is when she finds stories she wants to do, have at it. She's awesome at it. She gives presentation for her chapter. So she does an awesome job at that. So she held it down awesome. The interesting point, she turns to me this morning. She says, "They demonetized my video." I said, "On Sudan?" She says, "Yeah. Wow, they do such a thing." They've demonetized World War II channel, the Great War, the Ghost Army. They've demonetized channels that deal with stuff just of basic history. Think about that. Think about what YouTube is doing here. They demonetized her video on Sudan. I said, well, it's probably because it's talking about Sudan and there's violence in Sudan. She says, but shouldn't people know that? I think people should know that. Am I lying? No, you're not lying. Everything that you're saying in that video is dead on. You did an amazing job. Then why are they demonetizing my video? Yes, touche. Why are they demonetizing your video? So let's get another video demonetized. Let's hop across the pond. The leadership race. Boris Johnson, Jeremy Hunt. Up to this point, Jeremy Hunt had no chance. And now you have a hand of God. Boris Johnson himself. The police are called to Boris Johnson's house because there's a domestic dispute. The neighbors hear screaming, arguing, banging, yelling. And they hear this to such a degree that I don't necessarily know what was going on prior, but at least in this instance, they were so concerned that they call the cops. The cops go to the flat. Now, the neighbors are explaining, and I'm going to read to you exactly what the neighbors said. And I'm going to ask a basic question. If Boris Johnson wants to be prime minister, does Boris Johnson have questions to answer? Now, understand that this is only the Tories that are voting for this. And I question this process in and of itself. I mean, should the Tories be the determining factor in getting who becomes the prime minister, especially when they're having this leadership challenge and it's something as momentous as Brexit? Should the public get a say? And whether I think that or not, they're stuck with the same parliament they got, whoever wins. And that parliament was not able to deliver any Brexit across any type of Brexit. So you're going to have to take it back to the people anyway. But either way, if they don't try to take it back to the people, and if this prime minister does try to run with it, shouldn't you get a say? I mean, I guess let me ask this question. Is it okay that the prime minister may be a wife beater or a girlfriend beater? And should the person answer that question? I mean, and I'm not saying that that's what's taking place. So let me be very, very clear. I'm asking this from the standpoint of, shouldn't he answer that question? And I understand that many people, that question gets asked almost as a political gimmick. That regardless of what the person says, ultimately you're in a conversation about beating your wife. And the last thing you want to do is have a conversation about whether or not you beat your wife. There's some people who hate you, some people who love you. The people who hate you will try to believe it anyway, whether it's true or not, whether there's any substance to it or not. The whole point in that question is the question. The problem with this is the cops did go to the house and the neighbors are talking. And the neighbors are saying things like, we heard her say, "Get off me, Boris." If you want to be prime minister, he has to answer that. I'm not saying he has. For all I know, he could have been close to her. If so, say that. I guess I'm saying this. How does it sit with you of saying, look, whether or not he hits his girlfriend, whether or not he attacked his girlfriend, all of those things have nothing to do with the way he runs his country. And ask whether or not that sits with you in an okay way. He's going mum. He's not answering this question at all. And fortunately, the people in the UK have enough sense to ask the question of saying, wait a minute, you need to answer for this. What took place there? And he's like, well, nobody needs to know. No, people do need to know. Whether or not you become prime minister or not is something people get to ask the question on whether or not the quality of the character of the individual they put into that role. That is a fair question, especially since the cops, state, had to go to your house to figure out what was going on in there because people were so disturbed by what took place. You have no idea how much this story conflicts me. This story conflicts me in the politics because between Jeremy Corbyn and Jeremy Hunt has the political charisma of a wet sponge. In a political race that I think will have to take place because they have the same parliament that they had before, Jeremy Corbyn wins that. The Tories' brand was so burned, and Jeremy Hunt is essentially just a male Theresa May, he loses that contest. Boris Johnson is somewhat of an open question because he does have charisma. He is a political animal. And he does take up a room when he's in the room. That is a different contest. Yes, I look at those things in those terms. But in this case, it really is somewhat of a moot point. He should answer. Let me let you hear Boris Johnson when questioned about this. In fact, before I go to Boris Johnson himself, this is the police report. Just hear from the neighbors themselves. Yeah, let's hear from the neighbors themselves. Police confirmed they were called to the couple's South London flat after an argument was heard by his neighbors. They said that they heard slamming and banging, adding that at one point Simmons could be heard telling Boris Johnson, "Get off of me, get out of my flat." Get off of me is pretty specific. And by the way, this is hurting him. His 8-point lead was cut down to 3 points behind, again, a guy with like zero political charisma. Last night, the neighbor who contacted the police, Tom Penn, a playwright, issued a statement saying he wanted to put the record straight and the reasons that he called. In early hours of Friday morning, I answered a phone call from a takeaway food delivery driver. At the same time, I heard what sounded like shouting coming from the street. I went downstairs on the phone with the driver and collected my food. On the way back to my flat, it became clear that the shouting was coming from my neighbor's flat. It was loud enough and angry enough that I felt frightened and concerned for the welfare of those involved. So I went inside my home, closed the door, and pressed the record on the voice memos app on the phone. After a loud scream and banging following my silence, I ran upstairs and with my wife agreed we should check our neighbors. I knocked 3 times at the front door, but there was no response. I went back upstairs to my flat and we agreed that we should call the police. Another neighbor, nursery school teacher. It was really loud enough to make me turn down the TV and to see what was going on. I could hear shouting and screaming from a lady. She sounded really angry. There was a man's voice too, but he sounded much calmer, and he was telling her to calm down, but she was still chucking things about, she said. It went on for about 10 minutes. I never heard anything like it was considering calling the police, but then a police car came. He just needs to answer what happened. Just say what happened. Just say what happened. You, sir, are trying to become prime minister. I'm not saying you put your hands on her. I'm not saying you hit her. I'm not saying any of that stuff. And what it sounds like is she was throwing stuff about and flipping out. But the fact that she says, Boris, get off of me. Like, gotta explain that part. You gotta explain that part. And the fact of the matter is, even if you come out and say, look, she was pissed off at me. We were having an argument. And I tried to calm her down. And she told me to get off of her as I tried to calm her down. Just say it. And I'm saying this as somebody who wants you to win. So understand my position on this. You're being hit for this because nobody knows what took place. And in the absence of people knowing what took place, this comes out. Is Boris Johnson beating his wife? It's the beat your wife question. But the problem is there's substance to the question. What's his name? Boris Johnson was asked about this. And listen to his response. This is a bad response. This is a bad response.
As I do, that there is one subject on everybody's lips today, and they want to know why the police were called to your house in the early hours of Friday morning.
Thank you, Ian, and thank you very much for your kind remarks and your generous introduction, and thank you everybody for coming along to these first and most important hustings that we're going to be having. I don't know, it's not the most important. Be careful what I say. They'll all be important, but these are the first. Ian, listen. I think what people have come here today, seductive interviewer, there you are. I think people have. I don't think they want to hear about that kind of thing. Unless I'm wrong. I think. Forgive me.
No, sir, they do. If you've lost 5 points in the polls in this short period of time, and this is among Tories, meaning this is among the right-wingers of that country, they do. 1,000 times they do. You may be able to get over the finish line without dealing with this, but they do. Let's hear.
I think what they want to hear is what my plans are for the country and for our party.
We will come on to that.
And I know you're going to have to come back, and I salute your indefatigability as a journalist. And I'm under the sad obligation of wanting to get my message across to our party.
Well, you've just taken up a minute with that answer, which has told us absolutely nothing.
I love the way they talk in Britain. Like, they talk that way in Parliament. Like when he's giving those speeches and rhetoric and everything else, they do that in Parliament. He's good at it. But the problem is, this is the beat your wife question. And there is a low threshold for not answering that question. He never answered that question. He is going silent on that question. And then when you ask Jeremy Hunt, what is Jeremy Hunt supposed to do? As a politician, your opponent looks like something went on. The police was called to his house. We don't necessarily know what happened, but people are asking, did he put his hand on his girlfriend? It sounded like there was chaos. And now nobody's answering. The only thing that we have is the neighbors. Jeremy Hunt says, I'm not getting into his domestic life. But, there's always the but. He should answer. He should answer. Let's see, who's here? Are there any Brits here that are in the UK listening to this? I mean, and then a picture was released, and people are asking, when was this picture released? It was supposed to be him and his girlfriend, like out in the wilderness somewhere, hanging about. Bojo the Clown, do you think the Tories will come out of the cycle with any support? Left, yes, I do. If they go through Brexit, they economically fuck over Britain so badly it'll usher an era of Labour victories. If they don't, they'll lose their base. Man, you can't even beat your wife these days. People done gone soft. I know kills for a living. You can't even put your hands on your wife these days. So two things. Times has changed in regards to how people can deal with women. So the answer is yes. Two, we don't know if he put his hands on his wife. That's the problem. It's like, it's in the absence of knowing that people are like, wait a minute, what the fuck was going on? Why was the cops called to your house? It was that bad of a fight. Didn't you? What was going on? You need to at the very least say, look, we had a couple's dispute. I grabbed her in order to prevent her from throwing something. Whatever you want to say, you can always say something where contact was made, where you weren't beating your wife. I hope that's clear. This notion of, I was holding her. Get off me, Boris. I can understand that taking place, in which case the person lets the person go. Like, there's all sorts of things that you can explain in the way human beings relate to one another that can be aggressive, I guess, just in the case of these two people having a fight, but not over the line. They're adults. People argue. People fight. Don't put your hands on her. And vice versa. People fight. Second part, the Brexit thing. Yes, I do think they can get out of this. So this is my conflict. I want Corbyn to take power. I want Corbyn to win. Corbyn, however, between Corbyn and Boris, I don't know if Corbyn wins that. I got to be honest, I'm not in the UK, so I don't fully know. So I don't know how that tends to pan out in the sense of a vote. But it seems like an election will have to take place. If Boris Johnson wins, Boris Johnson still has the exact same parliament, more or less, that Theresa May had. You may think that he can whip these Tories into action, but either way, he has the same parliament that Theresa May has had. Tories do not have a majority in that parliament. It looks like you would have to have an election, almost by de facto, if you want to get anything accomplished in that parliament. Certainly, he's not going to get the Brexit that he wants out of that parliament. If they go for a no-deal Brexit, which is not what I think anybody wants. I don't care what anybody says. I don't think any of them want a no-deal Brexit, because I agree with you. That would fuck over Britain like nobody's business. By the same token, no-deal Brexit has to be on the table. I don't know how many times I have to say it. It has to be on the table in any negotiation. The European Union does not want a helter-skelter Brexit. They don't want Britain crashing out of the European Union. They don't want that either, because it's not necessarily the best thing for their interests either. So they have some incentive to negotiate, regardless of the position that they take. They may consider we're in a better negotiating position. That is true. However, if Britain is willing to live in some areas of depravity based on what the European Union may try to put over on Britain because it believes it's in a dominant position, Britain may have to take the position of we are willing to leave without a deal if you're going to force this other deal on us. That's always on the table. It has to be on the table. How can you not have that on the table? How can you go into the negotiation with full recognition that you are in a subservient role and you're going to take whatever they give you? That is a nonsense proposition. If the EU tells Boris Johnson, here's the exact same deal that we gave to Theresa May, say there is an election and Jeremy Corbyn gets it, and they give the exact same deal to him, what are either one of these people supposed to do with that scenario? Do you believe they should accept whatever they're given? Or have the capacity and the potential to walk? Now, if you say that, if you agree with me with that, then your only recourse is that we shouldn't leave the European Union, which essentially countermands the referendum. Just saying. The country decided to walk. No deal always had to be on the table. Always. There is no situation where no deal gets taken off the table. Just saying. It's a negotiation. It's what negotiations are. It's what deals are. All right. I'm going to end this. Bojo seems to be snorting some of that shit. That's funny. Until there's a clear accusation of evidence, they should be ignored. The political driven messaging. So yes and no. Yes and no. In fact, that's a no. That's not even a yes. Yeah, I completely disagree with that. The state gets involved and comes to your house. The neighbors come out and say, look, it sounded like there was a fight between the two. And people ask, well, wait a minute, what happened? I mean, the state gets involved, meaning, and this guy is trying to become prime minister. This woman is saying, get off of me. Those are just basic facts. I don't know how that's a political message. Those are just basic facts. And the basic question is, what happened? You could say it's none of your business. The problem is the police got involved, the state got involved. What happened? Are there certain character requirements that I have for prime minister? Yeah, of course. That's for anything. That'd be for prime minister or president. It's not insane for people to ask what happened. If your name is Jeremy Hunt, of course you're going to ask what happened. But if you're just some random Joe Schmo out in the countryside, that's like saying that that person shouldn't care that the cops was called to the prime minister's or to somebody who wants to be prime minister's house. Yeah, I disagree with that. Massively disagree with that. Edward Klein. So obviously the woman has eyeballs to say something like that. You know, I'm wondering, both of them have shut up. Both of them have gone mute on this. Boris Johnson is making the assumption that this will blow over. Boris Johnson might be right. I would say that he's going to get hit with this either way when he goes into the general election, which he may get dragged into anyway. So, nevertheless, Bojo, mind you, the guy that I want to win this, because I think he's the best person to deliver it. And I say that not because I think he's an awesome prime minister. Not even that I think he's an awesome person. I say that because at the very least, he takes the position that we are willing to leave. Everybody else not taking that position comes across as wishy-washy to me and not full well believing in Brexit or not even knowing what it means to be in a negotiation. As much as I dislike him, at the very least, he takes a legitimate position on this stuff. But the other ones get wishy-washy. So, I'll end this here. Alright guys, if you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support through PayPal or Patreon. And yeah, like I said, even $1 helps. Thanks all. Bye-bye. See you guys momentarily. I have a list of shows that I want to do today, so I'll see you in a few. Thanks everyone.